What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We've got more quarterbacks to talk about, but they're not the quarterbacks you think, at least not off the top of the show today, because we're talking about some quote-unquote tier 2 guys, maybe even a tier 3 guy, depending on who you are. Talking about Michael Penix and Spencer Rattler. We're going to go back and forth a little bit as to the advantages and disadvantages of drafting both guys. If you listen to the Patriots Talk podcast from earlier this week, myself and Tom Curran going over a couple of different scenarios. We'll go over them here again, just to sort of paint a picture. If the Patriots aren't necessarily sold on taking a quarterback at number 3 overall, if they don't have the conviction necessary to be able to draft a Drake May, for instance, at number 3, or a JJ McCarthy at number 3, assuming Jane Daniels is off the board at number 2, then what do you do? I've got a few ideas, and I want to share them with you. We're also talking with Spencer Rattler himself. Yes, we've had this interview in the can for a while now. We spoke to him actually during Super Bowl week, but had a great chat with him, talked about one of his favorite throws from this past season, talked about what it feels like for him to be a guy that I consider to be relatively underrated. That was not a great situation in South Carolina in terms of what he was dealing with on the offensive line. Now, he had a playmaking receiver in Xavier Legette, rare physical traits. We've talked about him on the podcast before. We will talk about him again down the line. But for me, Spencer Rattler and the traits that he brings to the table make him worthy of this kind of discussion, where we're talking about somebody, Michael Penix, who is coming from one of the best, if not the best, situations in all of college football when it comes to his offensive environment, when it comes to the talent that was in that huddle with him at Washington, versus somebody like Rattler, who he's playing in the SEC. He's playing at South Carolina. I don't want to make it sound like he's Josh Allen coming from Wyoming, playing with a guy, a bunch of guys that are never going to play football again. But it wasn't an awesome spot for him. And I think you could make some of the same excuses for him that you make for somebody like Drake May, for example, who, again, dealt with really shoddy protection. And there was a lot going on there in North Carolina that I think limited him in some ways in 2023, especially relative to his 2022, that really got him on the map as one of these high-end first-round picks. So we'll have a conversation for you in just a minute on Spencer Rattler. We're also going to be talking about some quarterback charting from Ben Solak of The Ringer, who does a great job charting the top prospects, providing for us some numbers as to how these different quarterbacks attack different areas of the field, how they work against pressure versus when they're working from a clean pocket, inside the pocket versus outside the pocket. And he's able to tell a story about all of these different prospects by digging into some of these numbers for us. So we'll focus specifically on May and McCarthy, going back to the guys who seem like the most likely options for the Patriots at 3 overall, again, assuming that Jane Daniels goes at number 2. And we will talk a little bit about some of our prototypical Patriots. We're going linebackers, dude. Not a lot of prototypes this year. Every single year, there seem to be fewer and fewer because we know the Patriots like them big at that position, 250 pounds plus, please and thank you very much. I didn't see not a single 250-pounder on this year's list when it comes to off-the-ball linebackers. So we've got to adjust. We've been adjusting the last couple of years here. We've got to adjust. We're setting the cutoff point at 235, and we're going from there. And there are a few 240-plus pound guys that I think are particularly good fits because of their play style as well as their frame. So we'll get into some names there with our prototypical linebackers. But first, let's start with this Rattler versus Penix conversation. I would rather draft Spencer Rattler than Michael Penix. Now, let's be clear. Do I think that Spencer Rattler is a better player than Michael Penix right now? I'm not so sure. In fact, I would lean towards Penix being the better player between these two guys. And now you're saying to yourselves, okay, Perry, you've got me in an absolute pretzel here. One guy is better than the other, and yet you'd rather take the worst one? The answer is yes, and it's because of opportunity cost. Even if Michael Penix, to me, is slightly better, he is not so much better than Spencer Rattler. He does not, to me, appear to be a drastically more promising prospect than Spencer Rattler, where I would be comfortable taking Penix in the early second round at 34 overall, or maybe even in the mid first round. If he's a trade down candidate kind of quarterback, say you pull off that trade with the Vikings, you end up with 2 first-round picks. You might not be able to wait till even pick number 23 to make sure you get Michael Penix, if that's your plan. You might have to take him at 11. And if it's Penix at 11 versus Rattler at 68 in the 3rd round, give me Rattler all day long. Again, I just don't see Michael Penix in the same way that some others do, where they feel good about him being a franchise quarterback for the long term. I start with the injury history. We know it by now. 2 season-ending shoulder injuries, 2 season-ending torn ACLs in the same right leg, his lead leg as a left-handed thrower. And then he's able to stay healthy this past year, absolutely lights it up. A couple of great seasons for Washington statistically. Unbelievable production. And man, is he fun to watch because he has a cannon, and the way that offense was designed, it was shots, 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 shots. Everybody. Thank you, Little John. That's his style of play. And in the right kind of scheme at the NFL level, I think that could work. Not only the right scheme, but the right situation. You have to have a line that can protect him because he is, generally speaking, a pocket passer. He tested really well at his pro day. I give him all the credit in the world for that, especially having gone through all the things that he's gone through from a physical standpoint to still be able to be the kind of athlete he is. That's really impressive. That athleticism just doesn't show up all that often, or didn't show up all that often while he was at Washington. He is not a scramble around, make a play, throw off platform kind of guy. From the pocket, launch it downfield. And it is impressive as hell to watch. And he is impressive as hell. And his story is because of everything he's been through and the fact that he's come out the other side and he's, a Heisman Trophy candidate last year. Unbelievable. There's so much to like about him. But between the injuries, some of the scatter shot accuracy in the short area, and the creative playmaking ability that just isn't there in the same way that it is for some of these other players at the top of the draft, or with somebody like Spencer Rattler. For me, Rattler is a little bit healthier. He has some pretty high upside. I mean, if you go back a few years, people were assuming by the time he became draft eligible, he was going to be a high-end pick because that was how he was considered. But loses his job to Caleb Williams at Oklahoma, has to transfer, has to go through this maturation process that many in the league believe he has gone through. And again, he has this thing that I think is difficult to teach. And if you don't have it now, I'm not sure it's something you can develop at the NFL level, which is the creativity, the confidence, the physical ability to be able to throw from a variety of different arm slots, off a variety of different platforms, from a clean pocket as you're being hit, and still able to make big plays. Those are, to me, those are the types of plays that separate a lot of the best quarterbacks in football now from the good quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow to a little lesser degree, Lamar Jackson certainly. All of these guys can create. They are creative. They are artistes at the position because of what they're able to do when they allow their instincts to take over. I think Justin Herbert has some of that. I don't think somebody like Kirk Cousins, who is a good quarterback, you can win a lot of games with Kirk Cousins, he doesn't have that in the same sort of way. Brock Purdy, I think, doesn't necessarily have that creative playmaking ability in the same sort of way. He can scramble and he can create yards on his own. There are just certain things that some of these guys can do because they are physically gifted. And Rattler, to me, he's not huge and he doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, but he has plenty of arm talent. And I think he has some of that creativity that you're looking for. And if you're a Drake May fan, part of the reason that you like him is because he's willing to do some of these things off schedule that Rattler also has the capability of doing, just in a very different sort of package. So that's why I would roll with Rattler late as opposed to Penix in the mid-first, the late first, the early second. Because I want to, if I'm not taking a quarterback at 3 overall and I'm trading down, I'm probably not comfortable taking a quarterback anywhere in the first 2 rounds. Because if I was, I would hope you just sit there and take him at 3, quite frankly. especially given where the Patriots are. So let's run through a couple of just very quick trade scenarios. Say you trade back to 6 with the New York Giants and you end up getting a future first. Maybe you even get a little bit more, but let's just, that's the general concept. The trade package that we're talking about isn't really at the core of what we're trying to work out here. So the Michael Penix scenario, to me, after trading down to number 6, would be you probably take a premium position that's not a quarterback. I don't think you'd need to take Penix at 6. So maybe you take Joe Alt there at 6, and maybe you wait all the way to 34. Maybe teams are a little bit spooked by Michael Penix. Even if some are thinking he might go in the first round, maybe he goes all the way up to 13 to the Raiders because they're quarterback hungry and they feel like Penix fits who they want to be, what Raider football is. That's throwing the ball downfield, that's creating explosive plays, explosive. How many times did Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels use that word in their opening press conference? They were trying to adjust and adapt the Patriot way to Vegas. And the word that got inserted to smart, tough, dependable was explosive. That's what the Raider way was going to be with those two guys there. That's what they want to be. That's what their ownership wants them to be. So maybe he goes all the way to 13. But let's just say for the sake of our argument here that he lasted 34. So that's where you would take Penix. And then at 68, you get your receiver. It's probably somebody who's not quite a true X, not one of the top slots, but maybe you get a Z like Jalen McMillan from Washington, Penix's teammate. And then maybe you're off and running with those two guys. Maybe you have a nice little connection there between those two to jump. The Rattler scenario would be, okay, sit there at 6, take Joe Alt again. Go with the tackle. I think that's something the Patriots would prefer as opposed to going with the receiver there. I don't know that for a fact, but that has been sort of the Packer way. Most of their great receivers have come actually on day 2, not on day 1. The one receiver who was taken in round 1 since Ron Wolf took over the Green Bay Packers in their front office in the early 90s is Javon Walker. He's the only one, first round receiver. So second round is usually where they do that kind of thing. In this scenario, that's exactly what they'll do. So they take Alt at 6. They still have that 34 pick. Top of the second round, they take Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. There's that name again. And then you pair him with his college teammate. How about that? So you've got this whole thing that's taken over the NFL now in certain corners. I don't want to go too far with that, but you've got the Burrow Chase situation. You've got the Tua Waddle situation. You've got the Hurts Devontae Smith situation. And both of these scenarios, both the Penix scenario and the Rattler scenario, I would much prefer the Rattler scenario where I've got a guy that I think is a franchise left tackle, which I have in the Penix scenario. But then I have a true X, which is exactly what the Patriots need. Big bodied, tons of speed, win contested catches, but also catch and run can be a factor for you there. I would just much rather have Xavier Legette for what the Patriots need right now than Jalen McMillan, though I like Jalen McMillan quite a bit. And then you're getting Rattler in the third as opposed to Penix in the second. Now, different sort of trade down scenario, but let's pair these two against each other again. Penix v. Rattler. The trade down scenario now is with Minnesota. So you get 11-23 and a future first. Okay, at 11, maybe you take a tackle there. It's not Joel. Maybe it's Troy Fautanu. Maybe it's Olu Fashanu. Maybe it's Amarius Mims. Maybe you love the physical traits that much, even though he had 8 starts at Georgia. You look at him and say, we don't care. Guys like that don't grow on trees. We need that guy playing left tackle for us for the next 10 years. At number 11 overall, then at 23, again, Raiders pass on Penix. All right, now he starts to slide. You sit there, you take Penix at 23 in the first round. Then at 34, you get Legette. All right, so this is actually looking pretty good to me. So let's keep this one in mind. Number 68, now you can go get Jalen McMillan. Now you've remade your receiver room. You've got a Z, you've got an X, you've got your left tackle, and you've got Michael Penix. If you love Penix, I think you'd have to love that scenario right there. If you're a Penix person, you're listening to this podcast, you're watching us on YouTube right now, you are rubbing your hands together, you are drooling, you are foaming at the mouth. You're saying, hell yes. Get me to 1 week from today. And let's figure this thing out because that's what I want. Let me hit you with the Rattler scenario first before you get too crazy. All right, you still have that number 11 pick. So whether it's Fautanu, whether it's Amarius Mims, whether it's Talisi Fuaga from Oregon State, one of these premium offensive tackles not named Joe Alt. That's who you're taking at 11. You're plugging him in at left tackle. Bookends with Mike Owenu. You're feeling pretty good about your offensive line. Number 23. Because you'd rather take Rattler later, Now you have the opportunity to take a receiver here. And you get the guy who might be the third best, quote unquote, X receiver in the draft. And it's Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. Now, you'll notice I didn't say third best receiver in the draft because his teammate Malik Neighbors, while you probably could just play him on the boundary and play him as your X, he's a better player. And he's going to go much higher than this at 23 overall. But you're getting the fourth best receiver in the draft, arguably, Brian Thomas Jr. All kinds of size, 4.3, 340 speed, down the boundary, deep ball situations, contested catch situations, red zone situations. True X, again, exactly what you need. So you've taken care of left tackle, you've taken care of your X receiver spot, that 34 overall pick. Still don't need to use it on the quarterback. Now you can get your Z, and it's Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. I've compared him a little bit to Julian Edelman. I feel like you could use him inside mostly, outside a little bit, but he ran in the low 4.4s. He's got great hands, really good athlete, can get in and out of his breaks, knows how to run routes. To me, that's a phenomenal rookie receiver pair right there. Brian Thomas Jr. and Ricky Pearsall. You still don't have your quarterback, but that's okay. You take Spencer Rattler at 68. So if we're talking Fautanu, Leggett, McMillan, Penix, or Fautanu, Thomas, Pearsall, Rattler, again, I'm leaning more towards scenario number 2 because I think there's more value to be had in rolling the dice on Rattler later and filling other positions than there is rolling the dice. And that's really what I would consider Penix. I consider that a roll of the dice of Penix in the back half of the first round or the early second. So you could throw almost any trade down scenario at me. Any scenario in which the Patriots don't want to take a quarterback at number 3 overall, and you'd be hard pressed to bowl me over, me personally, with an offer that would lead me to choose Penix over Rattler, and it comes down to opportunity cost. I believe you're going to have to take Penix much earlier. I would rather use that pick on one of these other positions. Because if you're not taking a quarterback at 3 overall, to me, it's telling me they don't value Michael Penix or any other quarterback to be the true future face of the franchise. It's even more of a dart throw than a pick at number 3 is. It's just, we think he might be able to be. Yeah, we're not really sure. If we were really sure, we would have just taken him at 3. We're not really sure. So we'll give it a shot. We'll see how it goes. If that's your approach, I'm doing that later in the draft, especially when there are so many good tackles and receivers in this year's class. Before we get to our conversation with Spencer Rattler, I do just want to lay out for you. I've given you my reasons for why I like him, and it's based on some of the things that I have heard from scouts on Spencer Rattler. And believe me, not everybody's enamored by the guy. If they were, you'd be talking about him as a late first-round pick, and you're not. Okay, so I understand that. But I want to lay out for you because we don't talk about him much. We talk so much about the guys at the very top of the draft, and we've talked quite a bit about Michael Penix, and he's more been in the spotlight these last few months, given how effective his team and his offense was at Washington. So I want to read for you a couple of different scouting reports from people I trust. All right, so Dane Brugler of The Athletic, friend of the program, Lance Zierlein, NFL.com, friend of the program, Jeremy Fowler, ESPN, just came out with a great piece talking about a lot of these different quarterbacks. Yes, the first round guys, but Rattler's in there as well, and has some great commentary from league people. Very plugged in guy, Fowler is. League people talking about Spencer Rattler and how he projects moving forward. Just to give you a better sense of who this guy is, because we haven't talked about him all that much. Here's Brugler. First of all, let's give you the measurements. 6 feet even, 6'002 to be precise, 211 pounds. Hand size, almost 10 inches, 9 7/8. So that to me is significantly larger than Drake Mace, just as a little bit of an aside, who's 9 1/8, significantly larger than JJ McCarthy's, who's 9 even. Just put that in your back pocket. Keep that in mind. Arm length 32.5. At the combine, he ran a sub 5 second 44.95, vertical jump of 32, broad jump of 9 feet, 3 cone 7.21, short shuttle 4.37. Honestly, not super impressive. He is not a great athlete in terms of the testing. It's the arm talent where the athleticism shows up. So here's Brugler on Spencer Rattler's strengths. Aesthetically pleasing passer with his fluid release and impressive arm talent, throws from a wide bounce space and delivers with confidence from any platform, can get the ball out with zip to access small windows, keeps his vision downfield with patience to allow routes to develop, trusts his anticipation to deliver before receivers are out of their breaks. Loves to push the ball downfield and would run 4 verts every other play if he could. Outstanding with ball fakes and mechanical repetition is a focus for him. This is me now talking. As an aside, that's something that the Patriots would appreciate. We haven't heard a lot of connection between the Patriots and Spencer Rattler. But I can tell you what I know of Alex Van Pelt, what I know of Ben McAdoo, who's going to have a very significant role in how this offense looks in 2024. Those guys appreciate themselves some quarterback mechanics. And so if they look at Drake May and they say, ooh, this is going to take a while. This is going to take some time to fix this thing up. And they're not all that confident that it is going to get fixed. And they look at JJ McCarthy and maybe they say the mechanics there look pretty good. But if there's pressure on him, if it's bearing down on it, the arm talent isn't quite maybe what we need. I'm hypothesizing here. Do they look at Rattler and say, he gives us a little bit of both? He is in tune with his mechanics. It's a focus for him, as Brugler puts it. He has nice big hands that should allow him to spin the ball in bad conditions in New England. But he also, when things break down, can get out on the move, throw it sidearm around a defender if he needs to in the short area, could take a shot to the chin and drive it deep down the field 60 yards in the air. That, just as an aside, that little note about his mechanics, I think would matter to the Patriots. All right, back to Dane's report now. Effective scrambler, to buy time, improvise, or pick up positive yardage when it is given to him. Worked to rebuild his image after transferring to South Carolina and was voted a team captain as a junior and senior. Tremendous work ethic and dedication to his craft. Finished his career 28-14 as a college starter. Okay, that last part to me is significant because coming from high school, he was on this QB1 Beyond the Lights special on Netflix, which is a series following high school quarterbacks. And he didn't come off all that well. If you remember, if you're a big time football fan and you happened to cross this at the time from Netflix, it didn't put him in the best light. And he didn't put himself in the best light. I think that's fair to say. But by all accounts, he has improved that off the field area of his profile in the last couple of years. So take that for what it's worth. All right. So there are your strengths from Dane Brugler. Here's Lane Zierlein, NFL.com, on Spencer Rattler. Under his strengths section, feet follow his eyes, throws with accuracy when comfortable, quick to snap into release motion when throwing on RPO looks, takes time but is capable of getting through full field reads, patient to allow the routes and spacing to mature before throwing, stands tough in the face of pressure and willing to take shots to complete throws. As an aside, we're going to talk about that with Rattler in just a minute. Back to Lance here. Helps his own cause by slipping past would-be sacks to extend the play. Not overly dynamic as a runner, but can go and get first downs. Zierlein also mentions he was better than some of his 2023 numbers might indicate, as poor pass blocking and drop-prone receivers often put him in bad spots. Again, those are some of the things that we say about Drake May quite a bit, and they do apply to the situation that Spencer Rattler was dealing with in South Carolina, even if May didn't quite have any weapon that is, in my opinion, on Xavier Legette's level. Devontae Walker is going to get drafted. He's probably going to get drafted on day 2. Maybe Legette gets drafted on day 2 as well. But I think Legette is sort of on that border of the first round into the second type of range, whereas Walker is more solidly a third round guy, maybe even a little bit later, depending on how many of these receivers get pushed down, because it's viewed as a deep class. And teams might wait to address that position and go after other spots because they say to themselves, well, why am I going to take a receiver in the second when I feel like I can get one in the third? I'm better off taking my guard here, or I'm better off taking my corner here. So it's something to keep in mind just in terms of the situations that these two guys have been facing. It's sort of a similar conversation for both. All right, now let's get to Jeremy Fowler, ESPN.com. The story came out earlier this week, talked to a number of executives about all of these quarterbacks. And he has Spencer Rattler in tier 4. And just to give you a little bit of context, here's how he ranks these guys with their tiers. Caleb Williams is tier 1 all by himself. Jaden Daniels is in tier 2, along with Drake May. He has a tier 2.5, which is JJ McCarthy. Tier 3 is Michael Penix and Bo Nix. And tier 4 is Spencer Rattler. His most frequent scout/exec comps, according to Fowler, Sam Howell and Will Levis. That'll get you fired up. Not exactly making my argument for me, but that's okay. Let's hear what Fowler has to say about Rattler here. Closer to Penix and Nix than people might think. Okay, now we're talking. Rattler is a compelling day 2 argument on draft week due to his confidence as a thrower and in interview settings. He can freaking spin it now, an AFC offensive coach said, quote, one of the best pure throwers in the draft, close quote. Several scouts agreed with that assessment. A veteran AFC scout called him the most underrated quarterback in the process. Again, just as an aside here, you're going to hear someone who is not nearly as qualified as a veteran AFC scout call Spencer Rattler the most underrated quarterback in this year's draft. A little bit later in the next Pats program here. Keep your ears open. Here's that scout, to Fowler, quote, he grew up over the duration of his career. Live arm, tough as bleep, the scout said. Quote, horrible offensive line play, was getting killed out there this year. Rattler took 40 sacks in 12 games last season, finishing with 5 300-yard games, but 19 touchdowns to 8 picks. Fowler goes on. Rattler exuded confidence in team interviews per an NFL coordinator. He had maturity questions to answer in the process, from unflattering high school clips as part of the QB1 series to sulking after benching in Oklahoma. He also called the Oklahoma situation toxic on his way out the door. A lot of people didn't love how that whole process played out. Back to Fowler now. But teams have been pleased with how Rattler has moved beyond such dialogue. Here's one AFC executive. Last little bit from Fowler on Rattler. Quote, he is said to have matured from the past, and I believe it. Super humble kid. We had good information on that he came on the other side of it. The bigger concern might be decision-making from the pocket. You would have liked to see more production from him. Okay. So you got a little bit of the negative there, and I will give you some drawbacks to his game. And I'll give you my own just right off the top. Size-wise, 6 feet even. I think it's going to make it tough for him to see the field, quite frankly. Some of these shorter quarterbacks, if you're trying to work from the pocket, and you have to be able to work from the pocket, as valuable as it is to work off platform, off schedule, outside the pocket, on the move, you do have to be able to win from the pocket. Eventually, defenses, if they know you can't do that, will force you to do that. How many times have we seen Bill Belichick and Gerard Mayo and the New England Patriots defense force mobile passers to stay in the well and use that crush rush? We've talked about it a number of times here on Next Pats. You just bull rush your blocker back into the pocket, make sure he has no escape lanes to access, and make him make accurate throws from the pocket. It's really difficult for some guys. And if that is impacted by Spencer Rattler's height at the next level, that to me is an issue which I would acknowledge. So there's the size, there's the inconsistency. Is some of that related to the situation? Sure, it might be, but he is relatively inconsistent, which, if you're hoping a guy is your starter for the long term, for the foreseeable future, that's something that you better feel like you can fix, and there's a path to fixing, which I believe there's a path to fixing that for Drake May. I'm not sure the path is as clear for Spencer Rattler because he's an older prospect. He's played more football. He's a little bit more in tune with his mechanics. He's got a lot of coaching over a lot of years. Drake May's a 3-sport athlete. Spencer Rattler was God's gift to football for years before even landing at South Carolina. So just two very different paths. And I think the ceiling is much higher for the younger, more underdeveloped May than it is Rattler, even though Rattler deals with some of the same inconsistencies. So those are my two issues with Spencer Rattler. I would readily acknowledge those. I would also say I'm taking him in the 3rd round. It's a roll of the dice. He's not the face of my franchise. He's a dart throw at the most important position in the sport. Sometimes those work out. Sometimes they don't. It doesn't hurt you as much in the 3rd round as it would in the middle of the 1st, back half of the 1st, top of the 2nd. That's the crux of my argument right there. Here are the weaknesses for Spencer Rattler from Lance Zierlein. Struggles to consistently process efficient reads and opportunities. Eyes float to and stay with primary receiver, even against tight coverage. Lacks NFL drive velocity, and deep balls have no late life on them. That's an interesting one to me. Just, again, little quick aside here, because you do have moments where you see him push the ball down the field and the thing is moving. And so late life on a 60-yard throw, I would just say the fact that he can get it there, to me, again, in the third round is impressive enough. And we've seen him do it while being contacted. So the drive velocity I could see, I hesitate to bring this name up because the arm talent, in my opinion, is very different. But Mac Jones threw a nice deep ball. He didn't have the drive velocity that he needed at times to get it to the boundary, to push it through tough conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, back to Lance. Leaves too many in-breaking throws on receivers' back hip. Muscle and accuracy on move throws are below average. Defaults into back leg throws when pressure begins to mount. Okay. Worth noting, for sure. Here's Dane Brugler on some of his weaknesses. Rattler's pocket movements and field reads are too systematic. Decision-making isn't a glaring issue, but his 2023 tape still showed more misreads and immature mistakes than you'd want to see. 3 intentional grounding penalties versus Texas A&M is one of the examples Brugler brings up. He goes on, can get reckless with the football, combined 20 interceptions and 14 fumbles over his 2 seasons at South Carolina. That's a concern. Accuracy sees a slight decline on the move or when attempting to drive the ball, staggering home road splits in 2023. Interesting. 74.7% completions and 20 total touchdowns at home. 59.3% completions and 3 touchdowns on the road. Whew, those are wild splits right there. And obviously, I'm reading these for the first time from Dane. I did not know those specific numbers. That's something you got to comb through one of these NFL teams. Character and leadership skills will be put under a microscope by NFL teams, Brugler says. Gained a reputation as a, quote, attention seeker and for rubbing many the wrong way, both in high school and at Oklahoma. Ruled ineligible for the second half of his high school senior season after violating a district code of conduct. Rattler acknowledged and said, quote, I made a childish and dumb mistake. Okay. Those are the kinds of things that NFL teams will dive into. I don't really care about anything he did in high school all that much, but that's part of what makes the beast from Brugler so valuable is it goes deep on all of these guys, almost to the degree an NFL team might. All right. So there are your strengths, your weaknesses, the whole picture on Spencer Rattler. I think we just got it right there. Again, third round, if you decide to pass on a quarterback at 3 overall, which I would not do. But if that's what you decide, if that's what the Patriots decide, if they want a consensus and they can't get to one, Ben McAdoo was really high on Josh Allen, that 2018 draft class. Elliott Wolf was really high on Baker Mayfield in that 2018 draft class. Those are 2 very different quarterbacks. I'm just posing this in the theoretical sense, but if there's a disagreement there between J.J. McCarthy and Drake May, because there are people in the room who they can't get on the same page in terms of what they want at that position, they end up trading back. To me, I'm going with that roll of the dice in the third round on Spencer Rattler, assuming you can get him there. Watch him go, at the end of the second round, and this entire conversation is moot. That's not for another whole week, though, so we're not going to worry about that right now, okay? Okay. Let's get to that conversation with Spencer Rattler right now. You can decide for yourself whether you like the guy or not. Has he matured? Do you feel like we had a good chat? Does he seem like the kind of person who could lead a group of men? You're going to have a couple minutes here to gauge for yourself. Obviously, NFL teams, thankfully, have much more time to make those kinds of decisions. But here's our conversation with Spencer Rattler. I really enjoyed it. I think he did too. Have a listen.
Very excited now to have with us on Next Pats, fresh off of a Senior Bowl MVP performance, South Carolina quarterback Spencer Rattler. Spencer, thanks for being with us.
Hey, appreciate you having me.
How was your Senior Bowl experience? We talk about the Senior Bowl every single year around this time. The Patriots, who we're obviously focused on, have dipped into the Senior Bowl again and again and again and again over the years. I assume they'll do it again this year, but what was your experience like? Why do you think it helped you get ready for the draft?
Yeah, it was a great experience. I think just acclimating to another new environment. A lot of different faces. You have to team up with a lot of guys you've gone against or know of. So that was cool, creating new relationships. Obviously, being around great coaches like Troy Brown, Kerry Joseph, Terrell Williams on my team. Just learning a lot. It was a great week and fun to compete out there.
Troy Brown, obviously we know really well. What did you think of working with him? And he was the offensive coordinator for your side. And so I'm just curious, what kinds of things? I know you can't get too into detail in terms of he's not handing you an 80-page playbook when you show up in Mobile, but what did you take away from what you learned from Troy's offense?
Yeah, I mean, he had a good amount of stuff in there, so we had to definitely study up and be ready throughout the week. But like you said, it's probably just a sliver of what they have at that next level. But it was awesome being around him. He's a great teacher, great coach, very detailed and very competitive. He wanted to win really bad. I'm sad we couldn't get it done for him, but we had a fun week with him.
When you're in that situation that week as a quarterback, where chemistry is so important with the people you're throwing the ball to, how do you try to adapt quickly in that spot?
Yeah, I think just, I felt very comfortable going into the week. I was fortunate enough to be in a pro-style offense these past 2 years, so getting in and out the huddle, I was pretty comfortable with it. So that was fun. But I think just, going out there, being who you are, going in one-on-ones, creating that chemistry early on with the receivers, that helped a lot. One-on-ones, routes on air, stuff like that.
All right, so I want to share a take with you that I have before the draft here. We do a lot of draft coverage here on the Next Pats podcast. I believe Spencer Rattler is the most underrated quarterback in this year's draft class. Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Why?
I don't want to put any labels on myself, but, I just want to keep working. Really, the outside noise doesn't – anybody's opinion, it is what it is. I just want to be who I am. If I'm underrated, if I'm overrated, I just want to keep working, get better.
What'd you learn about your experience going through the transfer process that you did, ended up in the SEC, very difficult place to play, again, acclimating to a new coaching staff, new system there. What did you learn about yourself when you went through that process?
Kind of like going into the Senior Bowl, just learning how to acclimate with new teammates, new coaches, a new city, new conference, everything. That was, fun for me. I didn't come in demanding respect, demanding this and that. I showed, my leadership through my work ethic at first, and then gained my teammates' trust. And, it was an amazing 2 years there at South Carolina.
If you could describe your game for our fan base, it's not, you might know this, New England area, it's not the most rabid college football area.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know your game, Spencer, how would you describe it?
I feel like I'm a pro-style pocket passer, but I could create with my legs, extend when I need to. I feel like I can make any throw on the field, and I feel like I'm a quick learner, fast processor.
You made one of the best throws that I've seen, certainly when it comes to quarterbacks coming into this year's draft. I'm thinking of the throw you made against Florida. Back foot.
Yeah.
Travels about 60 yards in the air, on the money, dime, massive play. Is there a play that stands out to you when you think about, okay, that if I had to pick one play that sort of defines who I am when I'm on the field, that's the one?
That's funny you said that. I just had an interview with PFF, and they asked me my favorite throw. That was it. So it's got to be that play versus Florida.
I could see why. The arm strength there is something that is ridiculous. Is that something you've always had? Have you had to work on that? We're sitting down right now. You're not a massive human being, Spencer. So where does that come from?
God's gifts, I feel like. I feel like I've always had a strong arm as a kid. Played baseball, pitched a little bit coming up, but just always played quarterback since I was 7 years old.
Multi-sport guy.
Guy.
And that may have helped you in your current profession, soon-to-be profession.
I hope so. Played football, basketball, baseball coming up, so they definitely help each other.
Shortstop
And pitcher.
You get all those different arm angles and off-platform and on the run, all that stuff.
Yep.
That's what you need, I feel like, in today's game. You have to be able to make the first – you called yourself a pocket passer, but do you feel like you have to be able to make at least one guy, maybe even two or three, depending on the play, miss before you can get that throw off that you need to make?
Yeah, no doubt. That was something that I got to experience in the SEC with these defenses, and obviously coming into the NFL, all these freak shows chasing after you. You're going to have to make some of them miss to create some time.
What would it mean to you – this will be the last question I ask you, Spencer. What would it mean to you to come to New England? Obviously, it's a franchise that's had a ton of success over the years from the time you were very small. Yep. Now they're in a period of transition. 4-13 last year. It's been a rough ride for Patriots fans. But what would it mean to you to come to New England potentially and help spark a turnaround there?
Yeah, I mean, it would mean a lot. I feel like getting picked anywhere is a blessing. obviously got a lot of respect for New England. Watched Tom Brady do so many great things coming up. Was around Troy Brown, so, it would mean a lot. But getting picked anywhere is a blessing.
There's Spencer Rattler, most underrated quarterback in this year's draft class. You heard it here first on the Next Pats podcast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We're 100 days out from the Paris Olympics and the countdown is on. Tune in this summer on NBC and Peacock to see the greatest athletes in the world go for the gold in the City of Light. All right, good stuff there from Spencer Rattler. I want to get into some of this quarterback charting from Ben Solak over at The Ringer. Great job by him being able to go through all of these throws and give us some numbers to chew on. And so let's start with Drake May. We'll do Drake May and JJ McCarthy. You got to get over to nfldraft.theringer.com to be able to check out all of Ben's work. Danny Kelly does a phenomenal job writing up all these prospects as well. Great work from those guys. They really care about the draft. They spend a ton of time on it. So we appreciate their grind. All right, let's get to some of the charting from Ben Solak on Drake May. He has a pinpoint accuracy percentage of 58.4. Is that good, you ask? Not so much. Just as a point of reference, Caleb Williams was 71.4. So significantly higher than the guy that many had right there with Drake May as 1A, 1B going into draft season. 9.2 air yards per attempt. That is chucking that thing down the field. 7.8 drop percentage. Yikes. That's really high. That's the reason for the yikes there. 2.9 interceptable pass percentage. Not amazing, but not the worst. Again, let's go back to Caleb Williams. He was at 3.4 when he was so often donning the cape for USC. Those guys are in similar situations where they feel like they got to put the team on their back. So they're putting it into harm's way occasionally. And 32.8% of his yardage was because of work done after the catch by his receivers. 32.8 yak percentage. Let's go back to Caleb Williams just for that quick point of reference. His was much higher. Over half of his yardage from last season, 52.6% of his yardage was done by his pass catchers after the catch. 52.6 yak percentage. Okay. Now, some really interesting stuff here from Solak. Continued. Under pressure, he had a 55.0 stand and deliver rate. Just as another point of reference, Jaden Daniels, not nearly that high. Almost, or I would say about 20% lower than that. About a third of the time he was pressured, he delivered a pass. All right, Drake May took a sack on 14.7% of his pressured dropbacks. He escaped on 15.6% of those. He scrambled on 9.2% of them, and he threw it away on 6.4%. The situational accuracy percentage. So these are his pinpoint passes in different situations, according to Ben Solak for Drake May. Pretty accurate on his first read and didn't drop all that much when he went beyond his first read. 63.5% accurate on his first read. Beyond his first read, 58.3%. So not a huge drop off there. Really interesting one here. In the pocket, he's actually less accurate than he was outside of the pocket. A little bit scary, quite frankly. But maybe is that explained away by the situation. 65.5% pinpoint accurate outside the pocket versus 61.7% inside the pocket. Here's Solak on what the numbers told him. Charting tells us a lot about May. May is inaccurate, but with a pinpoint score of 58.4%, he isn't prohibitively so. It's also worth remarking, he averaged 9.2 air yards per attempt, second best of the top 6 quarterbacks in this year's draft. He got just 32.8% of his yards after the catch. Again, we already referenced these numbers, but context for you. That number, 32.8% of his yards after the catch, was the lowest in this year's class. And the drop rate of his receivers, 7.8. Context is a world here, he says. He was the best beyond the first read in this class and the best out of the pocket in this class. Right up there at the top when throwing into a tight window as well, which he had to do on 25% of his dropbacks, which is a stupidly high, he says, number. Some of those tight windows come from May's gamer approach and his willingness to attack any throw, but plenty come from a stale offensive scheme and poor wide receiver play. May had the UNC offense on his back all season. The rough edges in May's game are certainly present in the numbers, but the high degree of difficulty is also present. That gives him a high NFL ceiling. I think some of those numbers are worth reiterating. Threw it down the field more than all but one quarterback in the top 6 this year. My guess is Penix was number 1 there, and May is number 2. 32.8% of his yards after the catch, compared to somebody like Caleb Williams, who was up over 50%. That was the lowest number in this year's class. That's worth noting. He wasn't getting a ton of help. Shorter throws, letting playmakers run with that thing. That was not happening in North Carolina. And he suffered a 7.8% drop rate. That is absurd. Highest in the class. So when we talk about the situation, the numbers bear it out, just how difficult it was for him at times. It's one of the reasons why I think his ceiling is even higher than some people might give him credit for. Now, how about J.J. McCarthy? What does Solak have to say about J.J. McCarthy? Here's the charting on McCarthy. 60.6% pinpoint percentage, so higher than Drake May, by about 2 percentage points. 7.9 air yards per attempt. Not necessarily a dink and dunk guy, not necessarily the air it out guy that Drake May was. 6.4 drop percentage, not great by Michigan, but better than what May had to deal with at North Carolina. 2.3 interceptable percentage, very similar to Drake May, who's at 2.9, and 46% of his yards came after the catch. Closer to that 50% number with Caleb Williams. Accuracy on his first read, not quite what May was. 59.8%, still pretty good. Beyond first read, drops significantly down to 40%, according to Solak. In the pocket, 60.4%, right around where Drake May was. Out of the pocket, drops significantly, which is surprising to me because one of the benefits I thought of J.J. McCarthy's game, and I know league people feel this way as well, is this is a guy that's going to be able to throw on the move for you. And you can see it. He's done it plenty in Michigan and made some ridiculously accurate throws while on the move. But according to Solak, over the breadth of his season, last season, his out-of-pocket stuff was only really accurate on 39, almost 40% of his throws. His work when clean versus when pressured, relatively similar there, 60.5% accurate when clean, 62.9% accurate when pressured, actually slightly better when pressured. That's pretty interesting to me. And then there are some numbers that I know Solak will point out in his little write-up here, but some of his work is not quite as accurate as some of the scouting reports would have you believe. Now, I think he has an excellent ability to challenge tight windows. You see it quite a bit in some of his work these last couple of years. But according to Solak, there are certain areas of the field where relative to other draftable quarterbacks, he is just not on the same plane from an accuracy perspective, which is, again, really interesting to me. Here's Solak. Let's get the story from him. Once you scrape together enough McCarthy reps to get a full sample, it's easy to understand why the league likes him. He's naturally accurate, makes pro throws on pro concepts, gets through his reads, and has developmental traits in both his arm and his legs. He checks a lot of boxes. There are some red flags on his profile. Like most who have charted McCarthy, I found his accuracy to the outside really wanting, especially to his left. His velocity starts to tail off, which is worrisome. His mechanics start to crumble as well. Another area of my charting in which McCarthy suffered, throwing outside of the pocket, which is something you'd imagine an athlete of his caliber would do well. But the red flags don't preclude McCarthy from NFL success. Instead, they make him seem just a little scheme-specific. McCarthy's success and willingness to throw into tight windows, especially over the middle of the field, would fit nicely in a Shanahan-style offense, as would his success on deep and play-action dropbacks alike. McCarthy is more limited than he seems at first blush as a 21-year-old with developmental traits, but there is a nice starting role in his future if he lands in the right system. So his willingness to throw to the middle, and I've said this before and I've heard this too, the willingness to attack the middle of the field would fit for what the Patriots want to do offensively. Those throws from that kind of scheme, that Shanahan / Kubiak / Stefanski / Alex Van Pelt type of scheme, is something that he's going to be able to do. And I think the numbers bear that out. But the accuracy outside and deep, this goes back to something we talked about on the Patriots Talk podcast with Tom Curran and Albert Breer last week, he is a bit of a one-speed thrower. And so there are moments where the deep stuff, when he misses, he really misses. Or if he's throwing to the boundary, does he have enough juice? Can he get everything into it the way he seems to need to in order to put the most velocity on the football? Can he do that when throwing to the outside or on some of these touch throws to the outside? Does he have the touch necessary to make those throws as accurate as possible? All that stuff I found interesting. Great job by Ben Solak. Really appreciate his work, because that has to take a ton of time to be able to chart all of that stuff the way he does. Phenomenal job. And they spell it out really well on the Ringers website. All sorts of interesting charts and easy to follow and easy to sort sorts of numbers and statistics there for draft nerds like you and me to really dig into and appreciate. So appreciate Solak for that. I did promise you some prototypical Patriots before we get out of here, so I'm going to give them to you, and they're going to be front seven defenders. Get fired up. I know that's what everybody wants out of this draft for the New England Patriots, but prototypical linebackers, let's start with those guys. Not a ton of big bodies. Junior Colson, who might be the first off the board from Michigan, 6'2", 238. He's on the list because he cleared that 235-pound threshold, but he's going to look a little undersized relative to other Patriots linebackers. He ain't Jawan Bentley. He ain't Jelani Tavai. He ain't the guy that he'd be playing for if he's drafted here. Dante Hightower is 265 coming out of Alabama. It's just not available at that position anymore. But because he likes to hit, because he likes to get downhill, because he's got the personality, seemingly, he won the Lott Impact Trophy. Impact, all caps, stands for integrity, maturity, performance, academics, community, tenacity. He won that award last year, the Ronnie Lott Impact Trophy. He's a fit for a lot of reasons. But let's move down the list a little bit further and get some of these bigger bodied types, these 240-plus guys that I think are worth paying attention to. Curtis Jacobs from Penn State. 3-year starter in a really talented and physically gifted front seven for the Nittany Lions. That in and of itself, pretty impressive. But he ran a 4.58 40 at 6'1", 241. That's the 82nd percentile for linebackers. His 10'4" broad jump is 85th percentile. And he has massive hands, 11-inch hands. Some of the biggest hands in the draft across positions. That's a 98th percentile for inside linebackers. That to me is a Patriots fit. There's also Jalen Ford from Texas, 6'2", 240. So at least he gets to that 240 mark. Nobody's 250, but 240, we'll take it. Played 49 games. Did not miss a game in 4 years playing linebacker. That is wild. High football IQ, was a captain for the Longhorns, 2-time All Big 12 selection, led Texas in tackles each of the last 2 years. Unbelievable nugget from Brugler's Beast Guide. Ford keeps a football card of Dick Butkus in his wallet. I love that. It's amazing. Is that not the kind of old school approach that you're going to want at this position if you're Dante Hightower and Gerard Mayo? Dick Butkus in the wallet? You're just carrying that around with you? Tremendous stuff, Jalen Ford. 6'2", 240. Keep an eye out for that guy. Day 3, in all likelihood. Last name I'll give you, Cedric Gray out of North Carolina. Senior Bowl guy. As was J.D. Bertrand from Notre Dame, who's also on this list. But Cedric Gray, I just retweeted a lengthy thread from Jim Nagy, executive director of the Reese Senior Bowl. It was all about Cedric Gray. All about his ability to get downhill and hit, as well as bring enough athleticism to the table to be a 3-down guy. 6'1", 241. So he's one of the bigger players on this list from a frame standpoint, but also really explosive, 35.5-inch vertical. He had a relative athletic score, an RAS of 8.04 from our guy, Kent Lee Platt. That is very strong. And so he has the athleticism. He has the size. He's, I think, a good enough athlete. I know he's a good enough athlete to play at the next level. And if they feel as though he has that downhill thumpers mentality that the Patriots want, that old school, take on a guard, blow him up, blow him back into the hole, and allow your teammates to rally to make a tackle. If that's Cedric Gray, I wouldn't be stunned if they wanted to invest at that position, because Again, there just aren't many big bodied guys out there that are going to also be willing to play the style of football that the Patriots ask their linebackers to play. And so if you can find that in this year's draft class, it might not be incredibly early because so many of these guys are just so streamlined and they're so athletic. I don't want to take anything away from these guys, but if you're in the Patriot system, that's what strong safeties are for. That's why Jabril Peppers is running around at the second level all the time. And Kyle Duggar, that they trust those guys to be able to almost play like linebackers. So they're not going to take a 230-pound linebacker, I don't think, even if he flies, because they'd rather use the safety there and then use the safety all over the field, use him in the slot, use him in the back, use him in the deep half, use him in the deep middle. Those linebackers, if you're a true linebacker, you've got to be willing to thump. You've got to be an old school, get downhill, throw your body into a fullback, throw your body into a guard, and punish somebody. That's who they are. Those guys have to embody what they want to do on the defensive side of the ball, and that is beat you up. They want to be a bully. And so if you're not a bully at this off-the-ball linebacker position, in all likelihood, you're not going to be in New England. All right, there are your prototypical linebackers. There's actually many more of them. They're already online right now, NBCSportsBoston.com. Not many more. I shouldn't say many more. There's a handful more that I think they do have that mindset that we're talking about. So go check out the full list over on the website. I'll give you quickly defensive tackles that I like for the Patriots. Not a lot of true nose tackles. There's a couple. Tavondre Sweat from Texas, 6'4", 366. Boy, this guy might end up going on day 3. And he might not have the personality that the Patriots are looking for. He is seemingly not serious enough about his gig. He just was arrested for DWI a couple weeks before the draft. Horrible judgment, immaturity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fill in whatever adjective you would like. But he's going to be available late, in my opinion. And he's a powerful cat, 6'4", 366. He's a space-eating nose tackle if you've ever seen one. And the Patriots oftentimes kind of like those guys. And so would they be willing to roll with whatever character concerns are there with Sweat? Because guys like him don't grow on trees. That's a fascinating question. I don't know the answer to that right now, but he is on our prototypical Patriots list, even though, again, he has some serious questions. Mason Smith from LSU, 6'5", 306. Lawrence Guy no longer on the roster. If you're looking for some of these 3-4 defensive end types, defensive tackle body types, but because they play this 3-4 style front, they very rarely ever have 3 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers out there. I understand that, but that's the kind of player they're looking for, generally speaking. That's the type of position that Mason Smith from LSU would fill at 6'5", 306. A lot to like there with him. I don't know if they're going to be willing to invest at this spot, quite frankly, early enough to get Mason Smith, but we'll see. How about Leonard Taylor from Miami, 6'3", 303 pounds, similar kind of role at the next level. And Alonzo Highsmith, Miami guy, just coming from the University of Miami, I would think would have a relationship there. And if he gets the sign off from Alonzo Highsmith, maybe that's the kind of player on day 3 they could be investing in there to give themselves a little bit of depth along their defensive front. Then there's Christian Boyd from Northern Iowa, 6'2", 329. Again, one of these true nose types. McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M, 6'1", 326. There are certain teams in the NFL that will look at these guys and say, not for us. We need guys that can get up the field. We need athletes. That's not the Patriots style of defense. If you can plug a couple of gaps, if you can tie up the center and the guard, if you can just make things muddy in the trenches, that's generally speaking what they want. Dominique Easley, draft pick aside, they're not necessarily looking for those explosive interior pass rusher only types. If you can do that, if you can be Christian Barmore and rush the passer from the interior, fantastic, great. But Christian Barmore also has the body type and is now developing into a much better run defender. And you're seeing him be able to play on all 3 downs. Had a tremendous year last year. So that's what you have to be able to envision for these guys. If you're the Patriots, generally speaking, we're talking about defensive tackles. It ain't about getting after the quarterback. It's about two-gapping and playing the run. So we have some names for you there. Go check them out on NBCSportsBoston.com. That's going to do it, guys. A lot of talking for me on this episode. Had no idea the episode was going to run this long, but I appreciate you for sticking with us if you stuck with us. Salute to you. We are so close to the draft. I know you're excited. I'm fired up. So much on Spencer Rattler today. We're going to get back to our bread and butter. We're going to be talking more about the very top of the draft. And we're going to be talking about some combinations, some day two combinations, because we got to figure out how are they going to address receiver and tackle. Do you go tackle first, then receiver, vice versa? And which players are going to be found in those ranges that can help the Patriots try to address all three? If they go quarterback at 3, is there any way they can come up with a quarterback, a left tackle, and a receiver at the top of this year's draft to address their most glaring needs? We'll dig into that a little bit further. We'll hear from Daniel Jeremiah, the great Daniel Jeremiah, NFL media. I had the opportunity to ask him what he think would be an ideal haul on day 2 when it comes to filling that receiver and tackle spot. And I think you're going to find his answer interesting. Some names that we haven't talked about a whole lot yet on Next Pats that we'll have to get to next time around. So later this week, we'll have another edition of Next Pats. We'll talk to you then. Appreciate you so much. Appreciate John the Skull Crusher Henry. Appreciate Casey Keene, who's putting this particular podcast together today. We'll talk to you next time, just a couple days and just about 1 full week before the draft. We'll talk to you soon.